All right. Once again, good morning, guys. And let me just check it out what we have seen. All right. So we completed that sharing part. And now you know that there are three different forms of sharing, although. So we could share a record manually, but there is a sharing button by which I could do this manual sharing. And whenever we are performing a manual sharing, we could share it directly to a single user as well, or to a public group also. The second form of sharing is the automatic sharing, which actually is done by writing a sharing rule for this. But understand one thing, whenever we do the automatic sharing, you can only share the records to public group. And there's no direct provision, although that we could share it to a single user. But I have told you the way. I mean, if you still wanted to do the same thing, I mean, you wanted to share a record to a single user by using the automatic sharing, what you can do is like you can form a group, you can create a group where you will going to add that single user only into this. So this is one of the workaround for this. And the third form of sharing was the Apex sharing. Although we are not going to read this because nowadays we are having flows and flows are extensively used. So, all this purpose, we usually do this with the flows. But for the sake of the interviews, right, we should know about one thing, that if I could share the record automatically, why should we require the Apex triggers for that? So these are some of the reasons that we have had a discussion on the last session. Now let me go with some other options of the OWDs. See, this was all about we started with a topic called OWD, and I told you that there are 9 different options, although in OWD. The most important option was making OWD as private for any object that we have completed so far. Because when we make OWD as private, and then only there is a meaning of sharing a record. Because when it is public of any form, like public read only, read write transfer or whatever, when it's public, it's actually available with everybody. So when the record could be accessed with everyone, we obviously cannot talk something about like sharing. I'm going to share one record to you. So there is no meaning to say that, because the second person will obviously going to say, "Now the record is already available with me. I could access that record. Why additionally you wanted me to share it?" Right? So the sharing mechanism only and only is activated, or maybe is like something that needs to be get discussed only when the OWD is private. So when making OWD is private, that was a lengthy discussion where we understand like what happens exactly what when we make OWD as private, and how does the sharing and all this works in the Salesforce. Now let's talk about the other options as well, and then we are going to end this. I'm going to start something new by today. See, when the OWD is public, it's the first of all, the record of that particular object is available to all of the users, right? Whenever the OWD is public for any object, for example, OWD is public for the contact object, opportunity object, campaign object. That's just an example. So when OWD is public, it's actually available. It's actually available with everybody, right? What you can control is something called as level of access. If it is public read only, then apart from the owner, everybody could also have access, but they can only read that data. They cannot customize, they cannot edit, they cannot delete, they cannot perform any another operation. They can just only read only, right? When the access type is read write, obviously the second user to whom the record has been shared, or maybe somebody who's accessing apart from the owner, he could also read, he could also write. But in both of the cases, uh he cannot delete the record, right? Deletion is something is only available with the administrator, the one who is having system admin profile with a Salesforce license, and by the owner of the record, the one who creates the record. So these are the only two persons that have this privilege, that they could delete the record, and nobody apart from this could have this, right? And now we are going to talk about see, these are something. These three options are available with the price book only, and this is something which is actually the objects that are in the master detail relationship, or at least those objects who behaves like a master detail. This option is only for them. Now, public full access is something which is available only with the campaigns, right? With the campaign record, you could access it. Like if you share it a record to, if the record is available with another user, he also have this full access. That means he could also delete that. So apart from the campaign, no other object allow you that if you are not an owner, if you are not a system admin, you can delete. Is the only campaign object that allows you, and that is the reason campaign by default have something called as the public full access. All right. Now let's talk about the read, write, and transfer. All right. Yes. Now let's talk about public read, write, transfer. Understand? See, let me try to show you something first of all. If I go with the accounts, all right. If I go with the accounts, and let's say there's an account record called as Sunil. Now this record, as you can see, who, if I would ask you like who is the owner of this record, you can tell me by looking into this field. You can tell me that training batch 208 is the owner of this record. Is the owner of this record. All right. See. Now I would share this. All right. Let me do one thing. Let me share this record. And I'll share this record. Manual sharing, obviously, I'm performing. I would be sharing this to, let's say, a testing user or maybe a customer user, right? I'll sharing this to the customer user with read only. Let me give him read write access. And now I would be saving this, right? Now let's go to the setup menu. Let's go to the setup menu. And I would go to the list of all users. And then I'll make a login into the customer user's account, because this is the user to whom I have shared this, right? Where is that? Customer user, right? So I'll make a login into his account, and now I would try to access. I'll go with all accounts. Now I can see a record of Sunil over here, right? I'll just open this record because I have given him read write access. You can see this user is having a read write access. He can perform certain, up to certain level, he can perform like editing as well. And let's say once he's done with the editing, he can save the records, right? So this is what happens when you share a record, right? Now, if you can see, if I would try to delete this record, right? This user customer is trying to delete the record. Although he's not the owner, you can see the owner is somebody else. Why he can access? Because this record was being shared from the owner itself. Owner has decided that I wanted to share this record with the customer user. And that is the reason, customer user actually is having the access to this. And now, if he would try to delete this, right? If he would attempt to delete this, you can see that Salesforce doesn't allow this user to delete a record of another user, right? Unless he is not an admin. And of course, he is not an admin. This user customer, we have given him a custom profile and a platform license, right? So he's not the system administrator. So you can share a record to somebody. Like if you share a record to a user, that user would obviously have an access. It depends what level of access you have given to him. There are two forms of it: read only and read write. All right, but he cannot delete that record. He cannot delete that record. Now let me go back. I'll just make a logout from here. I'll make a logout from here, and I would come back to the account object and user customer. I'm deleting this, that I don't want this record to get shared with him. Oh, 1 second. Rather, I'll do one thing. Now, I would just open this record, Sunil, and this time I'm not going to share this. I'm not going to share this. Rather, I would be going to transfer the ownership of this record. And from this point itself, we are going to have this understanding that what is the difference between record sharing and transferring the ownership of a record. And this is something you should have an understanding. I cannot say that this is important from the interview point of view. I'm not sure whether they would ask you this or not. Sometimes they could ask, sometimes not. But this is something which actually is important to understand for every administrators, Salesforce administrators. See, you have seen in like, in the case number 1, I have shared this record, and we have seen like what privilege the user has, like what the operation the user could perform and what he cannot perform. He obviously cannot delete that record. Now I'm doing one thing. I'm not sharing this record. Rather, I'm changing the ownership. You can see there is a button. There is a link over here. There's a link over here. Change. And I'm doing this manually. All right. I'm doing this manually. I visited this record. I visited this record Sunil. Then I go to the account owner and then I click onto this change. So this transfer, what I'm doing is actually a manual process. Now, to whom you wanted to transfer, you can transfer it to user and the partner user. Partner user, of course, is also a user. All right, partner user, of course, is also user. Technically, there is only one option. If you wanted to transfer the ownership, there's only one option, what you can see over here. User. I would be selecting the customer user. Let me select so that you would have an understanding. What is the difference between record sharing and transferring the record? And if you wanted to transfer all the related opportunities and all, you can click. Otherwise, you can simply skip that. This is at all mandatory. I would be just saving this record. And now this record belongs to user customer. This doesn't belongs to this user. It belongs to the user customer, right? All right, user customer. Now, I would be going to the customer users logging once again, and let me go with the account. I'll open that Sunil record, and this was the record. It was previously shared, but now the ownership has been transferred. All right. Can he edit this? Can he edit this record? If he wanted to edit, can he add it? Yes, of course he can do that. Right? Why? Because he's the owner. He can do everything. Can he delete this record? That's very important to understand. Yes. So when you are an owner, right? When you are an owner, apart from editing the record, apart from reading the record, you can also perform one operation that is called as deletion of the record. You can also delete this record. So if you are deleting the record, you must be the owner. Either you must be the owner or you must be a system administrator. You must have a system admin profile, and this profile always have a Salesforce license. All right. Just excuse me for 5 minutes. Just excuse me for 5 minutes. So see, this is what exactly it means by sharing a record, transferring the ownership of a record. All right. Transferring the ownership of the record. Now, I would be taking this topic Q, but before that, you must have an understanding of one thing. So let me take you back to the OWD once again. When we go with the fourth option of OWD, public read write as well as transfer. This option of OWD is only available for the lead and the case. Let me show you this. See, things are actually interrelated, right? These things always are interrelated. I'm into wrong login. And now if I go with the security controls and the sharing settings, right? I click onto this edit button. Now see, when you examine the lead object, lead have private, public read only, public read write. These three options are available with everyone except price book. We have seen this. We discussed this, that private, public, read only, and read write. These three options of OWD is always available almost with every object except the price book. Right. Now, but this option, public, read, write, transfer. Now, if you would see, this option is only available with the lead and the case, public, read, write, and transfer. And nowhere else apart from this. If I would make a click over here, I'll just try to make certain random clicks. Nowhere else apart from this, you're going to see this option of public read, write, and transfer. Public read, write, and transfer. So basically, this option, public read, write, and transfer, it's only available. And you can see that for the case, let me take it. Because accounts OWD is set to be private. That is the reason I cannot change it. I'll have to make this as public first of all. But anyways, for the lead, I can see the option by default is what? It's public read, write, and transfer. All right. So what is the difference between in that case? Now, first of all, understand. See, if I would talk about record sharing, you learn that there are 3 different techniques for that. You can share a record manually by pressing that share button, right? By pressing that share button, this one. You can also go with automatic sharing. And in the last lecture, we have seen like how to create the sharing rules for this, right? And we can also go with the Apex triggers. Although we haven't seen that, but at least we had a discussion like why to go with the Apex sharing, what could be the circumstances. Anyways, so when we talk about sharing, there are 3 different ways to do that. A record could be shared manually, record could also be shared automatically. Even by writing an Apex trigger, you can also share the record. This was sharing. Now let me talk about transferring the ownership of a record. I mean, as you can see over here, if you observe something, training batch 203, change the account ownership from where? From this to the user customer. See, it has been mentioned over here as well, right? Over here as well, it has been mentioned. This is something called as a default chatter area. Now, when we talk about transferring of the ownership, right? Transferring again if you ownership transfer or transferring of the ownership, this can be done manually. This can also be done automatically, like your sharing mechanism. If you wanted to transfer the ownership of a record, right, you can either do it manually or you can have an automatic mechanism in the Salesforce. We're going to read something called as assignment rules. For automatic sharing, there are sharing rules. And for automatic transfer of ownership, there is something called as assignment rules. So for the manual sharing, you understand like how I did this. I did this with this, this hyperlink, or maybe there's a field called as account owner. There's a field. And from here itself, I have changed the ownership. So that's how I achieved this manual sharing. But for the automatic sharing, we are going to learn something called as assignment rules. Now, see, one important thing to know over here. For manual sharing, of manual transfer of ownership, this one. The manual transfer of ownership, I could achieve this for any object, for any record of any object, any record of all objects. You can manually transfer the ownership of records of any object, right? I'll show you this. Let me just finish this diagram. But if I talk about the automatically transferring the ownership, first of all, to perform this process automatically, you have to go with the assignment rules. Now, assignment rules can be written either only for the lead object and for the case object. These are the only 2 objects on which you could write down the assignment rules. Why? Because these are the only 2 objects with having the OWD option as public read, write, and transfer. So I just have created this rough diagram. You can create a good diagram for guys. Just take a screenshot of this. And whenever you get the time, just draw a good diagram for this a tree structure or something else, whatever you feel. Let me just quickly have a revision. So what we are talking about, transferring the ownership of a record. I've shown you, like, before even starting this theory, I showed you this in the practically, how we can transfer the ownership of a record and what is the difference between ownership and Record sharing. When you share the record, the user would only get read only or read write access. But when you transfer the ownership, he becomes actually the owner. He can perform reading, he can perform writing, editing, and if he want, he can delete the record as well. So that was a difference between record sharing and transferring the ownership. Now, the ownership transfer can be done manually, as we have seen, and this can also be done automatically. This can also be done automatically. When we are doing this manually, there is a link. There's a field, first of all, there's a field called as owner field, and this is available with all of the objects. If you open a contact record, there also you'll see this. You open a campaign record, opportunity record, you can find it everywhere. So manually, you can transfer the ownership like this, right, to the any user. If you wanted this process to be happen automatically, right, like we have written sharing rules, you have seen that. Criteria-based sharing, owner-based sharing, guest user-based sharing. There are 3 forms of that. Technically, there are only 2 forms, user and guest user, both of them are same. And there was criteria-based sharing rule. Based on certain criteria, if the criteria would get fulfilled, the records automatically get shared. We have taken one example related to that. Kya tha wo? Hyderabad sales group. If the accounts industry was banking, rating was hot, and there are a few more criteria in that example, so that record automatically gets shared. So when we are sharing the record, we have written something called as sharing rules. Now we are talking about certain different entity. We are talking about transferring the ownership of a record automatically. So when we wanted to transfer it automatically, we would require to learn something called as assignment rules, is the upcoming topic. But assignment rules can only be created for lead and case. Understand? In the Salesforce right now, this is the limitation. Actually, not a limitation. This is certainly designed for assignment rules are being designed for Sales Cloud and Service Cloud. And the most important object in the Sales Cloud is lead. And most important object in the Service Cloud is case. So assignment rules can only be written for the sales process and for the service process. So that is the reason assignment rules are only available with the lead and the case, and no other object have this. See, you can write down sharing rules for all of them, or everyone. All right, you can write down. See, if I would ask you guys to create a difference between record sharing and transferring the ownership of record, so at least there is one point which is common. No, there is one point what you can tell is like when you share a record, the second person cannot delete it. When you transfer the record, ownership particularly, he can also do that. That was the only point. You can add one more point over there. Let's talk about the automatic sharing and automatic transfer of ownership. When I have created a sharing rule. When I have created a sharing rule for automatic sharing, the sharing rule can be created for any object. Any object in the sense of most of the objects, right? There is no limitations. But when we create, if I wanted to automatically transfer the ownership, I would going to create something called as assignment rule. Assignment rules are available only for the lead object and the case object. So you can add this, again, you can add this point as a point of difference, right? There would be like, in that case, there would be 2 points. You can tell in the interview if they would ask you this. So this is something I'm I'm actually preparing a background before I would going to start with assignment rules and queues and all. So step by step, we are progressing into this topic. So I'm actually creating a background in your mind so that we would have to understand what we are about to learn actually. All right. So this is something, is going to be the upcoming thing. Now I would like to show you one more thing. See, you wanted to transfer the ownership. You go to this change. Here you see only 2 options, partners and users. All right, great. You go with contacts and you open a contact record, by the way. Here also you can have this option, right? You wanted to change the ownership, you again see these 2. All right. You go with opportunities. You open a record over here and you wanted to transfer the ownership of this account. So you can transfer the ownership to a user, to a partner user, right? So this is what we see. If I would try with some other object, I'm going to see the same thing. Reports and dashboard, because that's a feature. That's not an object, first of all. Now, if I would go with case, for example, let's see, there's something which is different over here. And I open a case record, by the way. I open a case record. I go with the details tab. I wanted to transfer the ownership of this case manually. So I'm doing it manually right now. I go with this change. Here I'm going to see one more option. Queue. User, user, user. Let's say user, partner user, and customer portal user, all of them. These are community user, nothing else. Partner user is also community user. User is a normal user. Okay, all of them are users. Let's consider them into the single group. Let's consider them in a single category of user. But you see one more option, queue. And you don't find this option anywhere else apart from lead and case. Queue. I'm going to talk about this. I told you today I'm just trying to create a background. Right? Without going with this tunnel, you would not going to understand. That is the reason I'm just trying to introduce the things, preparing a base, and then we would obviously going to learn the things over here, right? I would open a lead record. Anyone? I'll try to change the ownership. Oh my God. Here also, you see this option queue. So this option queue is only available with few of the objects. With few of the objects. Lead is one of them. Case is also one of them. And there are few more objects. There are few more objects for which this option is enabled. If you are trying to transfer the ownership of that particular record, like let's say lead record, let's say case record. So you can select that. I can select it from a user. I mean, I can change it. I can change the ownership to any one of the user. I can also give this ownership to a queue. We don't have any queue right now, although. So this list appears to be a blank, but we're going to create that one, obviously. But let's understand, first of all. So now mark my word right now. Any such object, where you see this option queue, that while transferring the ownership, if you see the option called queue, while transferring the ownership, if you see the option queue, that kind of object is called as queue supporting object. That a kind of object is called as queue supporting object. I think I have a little list of that as well. Let me try to find it out in my notes. Yeah. And there may be a few more. I probably didn't get all of them. But there are a few of the objects like, lead, we have seen case, we have seen. There are objects like order, feedback questions. These all are the objects, feedback question sets, performance cycle, goal, metric, knowledge article, user provisioning, coaching. There are so many objects and all of the custom objects as well. All of the custom objects, you have to just enable a small permission, but even after that, let me try. I think for us, I haven't enabled that. All right, I have to first of all enable one thing over here, transferring of the ownership. So you can see is, do we have created by, but we don't see any option to change the ownership. They will have to make a little permission. We would just like to enable that, and we can do even that activity over here. So all of the custom objects, and few of the standard objects like lead and case and this, they are called as queue supporting objects. So particularly for those objects, if you try to transfer the ownership, like if you try this with the account, you're not going to find the option called queue over here. You try this transferring the ownership. You try transferring the ownership, or let's say contact. You're not going to find this option called as queue. This option particularly, would be available only with the queue supporting object, like case is one of them. All right, and lead. So we would going to understand what is queue first of all, and then in the second topic, manual sharing to manual transferring of ownership, वो तो मैंने अभी बता ही दिया आज आपको. फिर से I would be going to take it. And then we're going to understand something called as automatic transfer of ownership. Okay. So these are some of the upcoming topics. So I'm going to start with the queues particularly in the next lecture. That's all for today. Let me give you this command and now you can unmute yourself if you wanted to ask me anything. Yes. Any questions, guys, by the way? Any questions? Any questions? All right, then. Thank you so much for joining. Have a good day.